Good morning. We're really thrilled at this turnout, and as Tim mentioned to you, I view COSWA and INCOG like the NCAA talks about their corporate partners. They're very instrumental. This is a huge opportunity for us to bring information in a setting where we can reach many, many people. It leverages our time. I'd like my staff in industrial enforcement to stand, please, so you know who they are. We're here today. I would like anybody else from water quality. Okay, they're up there. Stand up, please. Come on, get up. On your feet, other people from water quality. Okay, we've got several more. DEQ legal staff, would you stand? Legal? I see you up there. Stand up. Yeah, we've got our attorneys here. Anyone else from the Department of Environmental Quality here that I missed from another floor, from another activity? Okay, these are your DEQ, who? They'll talk later. Okay. You'll have questions for them. I want you to know who these people are. We're here for you. We're here the next 2 days. If you have questions, comments, we welcome dialogue with you at breaks or other things. What a tremendous opportunity. Usually we're here at OEF and there are 30 DEQ people and 10 OEF people. So this is a real treat for us. I would like to give thanks to COSWA and INCOG. COSWA particularly, City of Oklahoma City. Why don't you people stand? City of Oklahoma City. Boy, nobody wants to stand up. And thank you. And Raymond and his group, he brings a whole brigade here and turns those out. Shout out to ODEQ, who's doing all the audio visual for us today. So that's just great. I'd like to acknowledge the work of Mark Dershweiler and Karen Milford and the stakeholder group. I was calling them stockholder group, but the stakeholder group put together OKR 10. And they did a great job of getting that ready and turning it out and getting it out and issued on time. I'd like to acknowledge Carrie for a lot of the preparation, as Tim acknowledged. That is exactly what's happened. And I'd like to acknowledge all of you for being here. That really, it leverages our time. It's a great opportunity. So thank you. We're hoping Joe Willingham will be here. Some of you were at an APWA thing yesterday and he almost lost his voice. He called me last night about 9:30. So I'm kind of like Father Mulcahy on MASH when he goes by and he says to Trapper, "Trapper, may I be of assistance?" And he says, "Yes, Father, you can pray for me to be a better surgeon in the next 30 seconds. So we'll pray for Joe that he has a voice that he can do that today. I'm Wayne T. Craney. I'm committed to making a difference, and I am an Iowa State Cyclone. A not-for-profit institution, I might add. We're going to go through in this. I set the table. That's my role today, set the table, like the deacon sets the table, like I do on Sunday. And we're going to talk about things for DEQ, having to do with regulatory and history and program and things like that. Regulatory history, delegation, types of permits we have, OKR 10 history, and future regulatory issues. Okay, there we go. Clean Water Act was passed in 1972 when Nixon set up the EPA, and they got it out of the dead hand of the Public Health Service. There was problems with that, and they passed Clean Water Act and later the Clean Air Act. Bill Ruckelshaus was the first administrator of EPA. They're a lot more sophisticated these days than they were there. And it focused on point source discharges, NPDES, National Point Discharge Elimination System. That debate between point source and non-point source still goes on today, and the non-point sources, of course, contribute to pollution, and they are not regulated. It was amended in 1987, and that addressed more diffuse sources of pollution, such as stormwater discharges, and that's why we're here today to discuss that particular activity and how it's regulated in this state. Phase 1 and Phase 2 was promulgated in 1990 by EPA. and it required medium and large municipal MS4s, municipal separate storm sewer system, generally of 100,000 or greater. And we have 2 of those in our state, City of Tulsa and the City of Oklahoma City, and they have really good programs that are very active, and they're good partners of ours as well, as I've mentioned. And this was phase 1, construction activities disturbing over 5 acres and industrial activities. Now, we'll go to the next thing, to phase 2, and the origin of this was that there was a lawsuit, my understanding of, there was a lawsuit, and EPA went, and their side of it was, we can't do all these things, and the judge said, well, what can you do? Well, out of that came the concept of phase 1 and phase 2. You start with phase 1. Some of you are developers. You do that when you go in to a subdivision, phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 2 came out December 8th, 1999, and that was small and medium MS4s and those within an urbanized area, and construction activities disturbing greater than 1 acre or larger, are part of a larger common plan of development. And we regulate those things today when we got into phase 2. And the program kind of changed. You can see it become much more complex and larger at that particular time. We got delegation. I started when DEQ was constituted in 1993. I'd never worked in state government before. Came in, Tim Ward and I and several other people were in that same office. There was Keystone Cops sometimes over there, but Tim is a character guy. I'll tell you that. I've known him for a long time. I've known him from the first day I started there. And he's a guy of character and loyalty and dependability, and you can count on him. So I do appreciate him helping me get started. I started over, I was somebody. I had scrambled eggs on my hat, things like that. You get some attention. And I was starting over at the bottom. I came in and started over. And he kind of helped me with that transition, which I needed at that time. And so kind of a fine line between professional confidence and coming across as a little bit overbearing, maybe. And one of the things people really like about me is that I never argue. That's what most folks that know me well would say. We got delegation on November 19th, 1996, and that was a result of a long and protracted negotiation and discussion and preparation of documents for EPA. And that brought permitting and enforcement of municipal and industrial wastewater. I had just started in wastewater at that time in about September, so I was really new when we got that. And that was a big deal to take over that delegation. It's a big deal for this state. And then in September 9th, 1997, we got stormwater and also industrial pretreatment. Somebody came and told me that we got stormwater. What the hell do we do with that, We didn't have anybody. We had industrial inspectors. And so we decided in the Oklahoma City metro area, what we were going to do is that Mark Hildebrand started working with developers on some of those things. And that's where we started. And we've grown now to where we have 3 full-time people that are doing stormwater. We've got the people in ECLS that process our things, and the attorneys help us with enforcement as needed. So that program has grown and is a lot more sophisticated than it was at that time. We have regulatory authority over the following. MS4s, there are a total of 46, including the 2 phase 1s. We have had a program, they're really audits, but we call them screening evaluations, and next month we'll have gone through an evaluation of all of the programs, including a program review with ODEQ. They don't have a permit, but we're going to review them as though they did, and we'll have been through that, which I think puts Oklahoma, my adoptive state, in very good shape, I would say. So I acknowledge the staff who have helped, and we're going to finish that. We've got Spencer and Catoosa and the ODEQ program review, and we're going to have through, and then we're not going to do those for a while, at least the rest of this year. The other things we regulate are industrial activities. Industrial activities, you have to go to the OKR 05 and look at the sectors and the SIC codes. And every time I think I understand SIC codes, then we come up with something, and I have to go back and have Joe go back with his book and parse all of those things and figure out exactly what's covered there. And you do need to look carefully at the wording as to what the SIC code covers. And if you need the SIC code, you can tell an industry or somebody, show us your tax records, go to your tax records, because the IRS requires that SIC code. If they tell you they don't have it, you tell them, go to your tax records and go to your accountant, you can find that for us. We regulate construction activities, and then there's one exception to the normal way we do business, which is through the general permits, the 3, OKR 04 for the MS4s, OKR 10 for the construction, it's what we're here about today, and OKR 05 for the industries. And that is OKG 11 for concrete batch plants, and that's an exception. I wish we didn't have an exception. I'd like everything to be the same, but for certain reasons, stormwater is rolled into concrete batch plants that are authorized under that general permit. MS4s. MS4s are like our corporate partners. I live in Oklahoma City, and I'm really proud of the Oklahoma City government. I'm proud to live in Oklahoma City. The things that have happened there and the leadership that we've had. And as far as MS4s, they're exemplary for the rest of the country. We went to a MS4 conference in Santa Fe, and we go on a field trip to Albuquerque. Guy asked me where I'm from. Our host, who was taking us around to the drainage folks, and he said, yeah, Oklahoma City, we know them. They've got one of the best programs in the country. I didn't ask him to say that. He volunteered that. And yeah, I think that really speaks well of the city, of the leadership, of the staff, you know, in Oklahoma City. And they run a first-class household hazardous waste facility down in Southwest 15th, and you go there and they take care of things. If there's industrial accidents like the Bachman, that fire, they really respond to that. They've got their act together. They're a class program that's nationally recognized, and that's great. City of Tulsa has just got their permit reauthorized, and they're going in to do things. City of Tulsa is different than Oklahoma City. They're organized a little different, and they've got reorganization there and things that are going on, and so they're trying with a new organization and a new format to go on with this new program. And one of the things they're doing is they have a monitoring component, and they have a consultant that's helping them. They're in the first year of getting that monitoring component up and running. And that really is important. We'll talk a little bit about ELGs later today, but remember that, effluent limitation guidelines. And then we've got the other permittees, and there are 34 cities, 5 counties, and 4 non-traditionals such as Tinker Air Force Base, University of Oklahoma, and ODOT is also in that category. Even though they do not have a permit, they function as though they do. Individual permits, Oklahoma City was issued September 1st, 1995, Tulsa, April 1st, 1997. And they're both are co-permittees with ODOT and OTA, the Oklahoma Transportation Authority. What we use is a pollution prevention approach. And I can't say this enough. What we want is compliance with the environmental regulations. We don't want enforcement. We don't want fines. We want compliance. And across the continuum of things we have available to us to get that is enforcement, of course. But that's the last stop if the other things that we've tried to do have not worked. Every one of these MS4s has a stormwater management plan, and that plan sets out how they're going to go about doing that program. They're developed by the MS4. Sometimes they use a consultant, sometimes they do it in-house, sometimes it's a combination. What this is a performance type of thing. It's like a performance spec that you write on a contract. We have performance, and so, you know, how do they do that? They can format it any way they want, as long as you end up with the result where we want to be, which is compliance. And it spells out how the MS4 will address and manage stormwater discharges. General permit OKR 04, it was effective February 8th, 2005. They use the SWMP, and there are then 6 MCMs that they have, and an optional MCM 7 for municipal projects. They select the BMPs, they identify measurable goals, they evaluate effectiveness, and they use that to update their SWMPs and to change those things on an annual basis. As an agency, we need to get that reauthorized. It's very, very important that we go because the communities kind of are waiting until that comes out. They want to know. And that's, you know, if I was in there, if I was on that side of the fence in their shoes, that's what I'd do too. What's in the permit? Tell us what we're going to have to do, and then we'll go and do that. Now, one of the things that I really want to emphasize, and we'll emphasize this whole day, is that stormwater is different than the other permits that we write. The other permits that we write in industrial, we deal with all the time, have numerical limits at the outlet, okay? They've got numerical limits. And if you exceed those limits, then you're in violation of your permit. And if you exceed a certain parameters, then you're SNC, significant noncompliance. And we have to enforce on those in some way because that's what our delegation agreement with EPA says we have to do. Stormwater is different because you use BMPs, and the BMPs are how the permittee achieves the reduction of pollutants that go into the environment. So that concept is really important to use the BMPs and to use the right BMPs in the right way and the right combination. You're using BMPs rather than numerical limits. That's a very important concept. It's important that the permittees document that reduction of pollutants. A lot of the lawsuits between EPA and the environmental groups have to do with this very type of thing. And the report that was done by the NRC, I think it's called, a couple years ago, said that the approach didn't work. I'd kind of take issue with that, but in the absence of having that reduction of the pollutants, then I can kind of see where they came up with that. Industrial stormwater. It applies only to certain activities, and the activities are, you know, risk-based, where there's a risk, where there's going to be pollution coming out of these industries. Not everything is regulated. Not everything needs to be regulated. I don't consider myself to be a professional regulator, and I don't want to regulate everything. I want to regulate the things we need to regulate and regulate them in the right way, and things we don't regulate, they'll have to take care of themselves. Howsoever, you get a call, somebody calls me up and says, well, I've got a operation where I go in and I power wash a used car lot, and I power wash the cars and things like that. Do I need to be permitted? Well, probably not, but probably, no, not probably, for sure, you got to use BMPs. All of these things you can use BMPs, those best management practices that limit the pollution, that limit pollutants and that kind of thing. In the industrial permit, you have to go into the table and you have to look in the SIC code, and the SIC codes are really kind of like preempted, but you can cross-reference them with the NAICS, and that's what's currently used. And so for people that don't do this all the time, it gets a little bit cumbersome to figure that out. But you have to look at the SIC code. Does it cover that particular activity? And that's what you have to do. We don't cover everything, we just cover the things that are in there. Multi-sector permit OKR05, they have to have an SWP3, they have to use BMPs, there's quarterly visual monitoring, and regular site inspections. Some industries can qualify for no exposure, but when you get into no exposure for your industries, that truly is no exposure, okay? So they've got to have it, move it inside or cover it up or something. There's a substantial difference in how that's handled and the amount of money that's cost for the permit and everything for that NEC. And we're willing to help work with industries to try to get them there. They have to make some changes, and it's a trade-off. They have to make process changes and facility changes, but they don't have to have the permits. What we're here today to talk about basically is OKR 10, and that's its entire first day. That's what we're talking about is the OKR 10. It applies where EPA is a permitting authority in Indian lands. They're the EPA is a permitting authority in New Mexico. They do all the inspections. The first construction general permit was issued in 1992, and the current one was reauthorized February 16th, 2012, inspected for 5 years, as all NPDES permits are, and includes new requirements to implement effluent limitation guidelines and new source performance standards for construction and development point sources, which is known as the C&D. And I wish they hadn't used that, because that means construction and demolition to me. But there's kind of a cross-reference there. It doesn't include the ELGs. That didn't get in, but some of the other requirements as far as buffers, which Carrie will talk about and others will talk about, did get in. So we got part of it, but we didn't get the ELGs, thank goodness. It requires construction site operators to meet restrictions on erosion and sediment control, pollution prevention, stabilization, and it included a numerical turbidity limit for certain larger construction sites, and that was 280. When they first came out with the rule, they had 13 NTUs. I used to work in public water supply, and I tell you that 13, and that's almost what groundwater under the influence of surface water was. Well, that was stayed by EPA on January 4th, 2011, and it's not required to be incorporated in current construction stormwater general permits by EPA or delegated states. And what happened was that the judge remanded this case back to EPA and said, EPA folks, go back and bring this back with better science, use better science, and bring this back so we can reach a resolution of this. OKR 10 is Oklahoma's version of EPA's construction general permit. It's effective for a 5-year period. And it includes the non-numeric effluent limitation guidelines from the C&D rule, and that'll be discussed later today. And that's something new we're going to have to work through as part of the review, part of the submission of the applications for permit, and as part of the review and the authorization of those. OKR 10 applies to construction activities that disturb an acre or greater, part of a common plan of development that disturbs an acre or greater. They have to have an SWP3, regular site inspections, BMPs, and the buffers. The first three things have been in there, and the buffers are new. That's a new requirements in the back of the permit. The way that was developed, there was a stakeholder group, and I'm not going to name the people on there. Some of you, a lot of you in this room, were on a stakeholder group. I'm not going to name you because I'd leave somebody out, but the way it was developed was to review EPA's construction general permit, develop a draft. The stakeholder advisory committee met a number of times. We were involved in that. We had to work on the definition of owner-operator. It's really, really hard to do and to get a grip on something that really will work for us and work for the regulated community. And then the construction general permit was issued on August 13th, 2012. And it was effective September 13th, 2012. We didn't have any break in service, and we're right in the process now of reauthorizing that. Talk a little bit about the MS4s. Each MS4 has its own construction stormwater permitting requirements. It's required part of the MS4 program, and it can be more stringent than what our requirements are. Same as the states can be more stringent than the EPA if we desire. In some cases we are. And some require permits for sites disturbing less than 1 acre. A lot of communities have a land disturbance permit that's issued at modest cost or no cost, and it covers everything. I mean, if you disturb a postage stamp size piece of property, then you have to have that land disturbance permit. Many people have that. So if you go into a city or local community, then check with them to see what their permitting requirements are. And what we found out in visiting the MS4s is they're like individuals, and they have personalities, and they have strengths, and they have weaknesses, and they have things they like and things they don't like. And it's I found that to be very interesting and really get a flavor of the communities and the people in this state. That has been really a good experience for me to meet those people there. They are our partners. Stormwater enforcement. Stormwater is the second largest category of complaints, next to open dumping probably, off-site tracking, red water coming off sites, somebody not being permitted. Sometimes the complaints are sour grapes. Somebody got fired for failing a drug test, and you can pretty well tell when you look at the complaint record. Somebody used to work there and wanted to get back at the people that fired him, but some of them are bona fide. They come, you know, if they go across the spectrum of how that works. Second largest category of complaints, and we work all those. They have to be closed within 90 days. And compliance, again, compliance is our goal. And the responsiveness of the RP determines if enforcement's necessary. And if we do have to enforce, we will. Now, to be very honest about it, we've got 3 people. The industrial inspectors are cross-trained, so we've got right now 8 people in our unit, and we're going to get a new DE next week, plus myself. Well, that's not much for all the things. We're like the FDA regulators with all of the food sources and everything. We see the tip of the iceberg, but what's on the tip of the iceberg is going to get attention from us. And we hope that that will eventually go across the board, and some of the things that we maybe have not seen, we will be seeing, and that there will be compliance widely in this state. So that's what our goal is. If we get into enforcement, we do require an administrative penalty. Our legal staff helps us do that, and it's just in accordance with what the management wants and what we usually do. But for non-compliance, there is a penalty that will be involved in a consent order or enforcement order, whatever it is. Enforcement orders, inspections, a lot of the things are done by ECLS, some by us. There's a 14-day compliance period. We go inspect it, come back 14 days. Is it okay? Did they take care of things? If they did, we close it. If not, then we go for enforcement. We start with an NOV, a notice violation. We've started something that we hope is going to be useful to us, which is an expedited consent order. This is a variation of what EPA uses in New Mexico, and they do all of their business there with these expedited settlement offers. Typically what we do is a consent order. It almost always has a penalty in it that can be mitigated in part by an SEP, Supplemental Environmental Project. This is all subject to the EPA requirements. There must be a nexus and all those sorts of things. I would say that SEPs are typically involved more in the municipal practice probably than with the industries that we regulate or the stormwater permittees, but it's always possible. And then if we can't get compliance by using a consent order, then we go with an administrative compliance order. And that's not an agreed to thing. That's issued by us with a penalty or SCP put in it. And it's usually sequential. We go through these steps, and that's where we end. So just some information. You can see in 2010, 2011, and 2012, number of NOVs, the number of orders we issued, and the penalties and SEPs that were collected. And I'm not hung up on numbers. You have to do this at something for your annual report, but again, compliance is our goal, and that's where we direct our efforts, and that's what we want to see. Future regulatory issues. EPA stormwater rulemaking, the rules to be proposed by January 10th, 2013. It will apply to most MS4s. And the EPA desperately wants to expand the definition of MS4s. And we have watersheds, unincorporated areas in the counties. They've used various things. My personal and professional opinion is that the MS4s are really taxed. They've got this put on them, that responsibility. And it's a tough deal in this economic climate for them to meet those requirements. It's tough for us when we're short-staffed to meet the goals that we have, but that's the reality. But EPA wants to expand that MS4 universe. We don't know what will happen with that. I just know that I live in Oklahoma City, and I've paid on my utility bill unfunded federal mandate, and I've paid it for many, many years, and it's gone up to $5 now. And it just says unfunded federal mandate. And that's what it is. And so we're wanting to work with those MS4s. We kind of understand where they are and trying to do this sort of thing. They're exploring additional options for establishing specific requirements for transportation facilities. They sure are. And they want to do what they call arterials. The guy from South Dakota said, we don't have a lot of stuff going on. There's 2 major cities in our state, which is Sioux Falls and Rapid City. And he said, there's not a lot of activity. We need to regulate between those 2 places. The guy from Wyoming said the same thing. We get involved in a lot of those conference calls with EPA and with SWPCA. They're evaluating additional provisions specific to the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And there's a reason for that, but that's not applicable to us. It's like the Great Lakes standards, you know, some of those things that we use that come out of that. Of note for the construction industry is they're developing performance standards from newly developed and redeveloped sites to better address stormwater management as projects are built. That is the coming thing. They talk a lot about retrofit, and that would require the implementation of post-construction best management practice to retain the runoff from a certain size storm event. Okay, post-construction, remember that, that'll be covered later, later today. Many of our communities that we go in are already doing that, and they'll say to somebody that wants to build some kind of a business or to build a church or something, say, you're putting in impervious types of things, the runoff has to be what it was before. They've already got that. I would say half of our MS4s have told us that they already have that in there. MS4s, they're exploring options or expanding protections of the MS4 program. They darn sure are. There's a lot of that going on. Evaluate options for establishing and implementing a municipal program to reduce discharges from existing development retrofit. That's a pretty nifty trick if you can do it. And evaluate establishing a single set of MCMs for regular MS4s. And they've said there will be no more phase ones. I don't know how you go back and regulate that or incorporate that because the two phase ones have individual permits and all the others come under OK or 04, general permit. And so there's a little different thrust there, a lot of specific requirements for the phase one MS4s. Construction effluent limitation guidelines, numerical turbidity limits currently under review by EPA. We talked about that, it was a 280. Additional treatment performance data from construction and development sites being sought. They will propose a limit in the future. They're to come back and bring it back to the court. And they may require construction site operators to sample and analyze stormwater discharges. When we get into that, and I'll probably be gone from DEQ by that time, for goodness, for my sake at least. But when we get into that, that brings a whole host of issues. QA/QC, lab analysis, making sure that you got certification for that. When do you sample? How much do you have to sample? How long do you have to sample? All those sorts of things. You get into that. That's a slippery slope. It really is. And so those are the kinds, in the context of what we talk about today for the construction permit, we're going to talk about what we've got. But in the future, all of those things will be involved in that. DEQ stormwater contacts are here. Permitting is Mark Dershwater and Karen Milford. Permit administration is an ECLS, Matt Pace, Amber McIntyre, Matt Johnson, and then our group here, which includes myself, Bob Giger, Michelle Loudenbeck, and Joe Willingham, and our industrial engineers, DEs. They are all cross-trained. Now, let's go back. Something I want to say, kind of finish up. My first impression of Oklahoma City, I came through here, was back in the 60s. Do you remember the waste plant that was on the east side of I-35? Do you remember that stuff that was out there? Do you remember the smell? And as you came down I-35, I think it was trickling filters or something, but they were doing something with trickling filters or sludge. And you come down I-35 and then you come into the community. It was terrible. It was just, it was that smell. And fortunately, those things have gone. Oklahoma City has up-to-date plants, 4 of them. Thanks to good city government and the vision of Mayor Norick, Mayor Humphreys, Mayor Cornett, they had this thing called MAPS. They had this thing called MAPS. And then they had MAPS 3 and MAPS for kids. Go down in Bricktown and look at what's there. Look at the arena. Look at those things and the stuff they're going to build to take place where I-40 was. You know? What we're doing in stormwater is we're raising everything. We're having better environmental compliance. Oklahoma City's done that. It's becoming a first-class city. I'm proud to be a citizen that lives there. I really am. And I acknowledge those people for their vision and for their leadership. And the people, the citizens that live there, for paying for it. And I think generally that citizens, the people that live in these communities, are willing to pay for things when they see the results of that. we've gone from that place out at I-35 to what we've got today. A city that we can truly be proud of and be glad that we live there and acknowledge the great leadership that we have. Any questions, comments, discussions? We'll be here the next all day today and all day tomorrow. Okay, thank you very much.